Imagine for a moment coming face to face with Buddha in the most unexpected place. Hell, it seems like a contradiction, right? How could the enlightened one be in the realm of eternal torment? This paradox was precisely the catalyst that forever changed the life of Takashi, a man who had dedicated 60 years of his life to the pursuit of physical and mental perfection through traditional karate. On the quiet streets of Kyoto, where ancient temples meet modern skyscrapers, Takashi grew up under the strict tutelage of his grandfather, a man whose words resonated like tempered steel. Discipline and honor are all a man needs. These words became the mantra that would shape his existence for over half a century, leading him down a path of unwavering dedication that would, ironically, lead him to his greatest existential crisis. Takashi was no mere martial arts practitioner. He was the living embodiment of the Eastern discipline. His dojo was legendary in the community, a place where hundreds of students had learned not only to defend their bodies, but to strengthen their minds as well, or at least, that was what he believed he was teaching. With each perfectly executed kata, with each masterfully demonstrated technique, Takashi felt himself getting closer to some kind of universal truth. Yet deep within him, a lingering emptiness grew like a shadow at dusk. Those who knew him described him as a man of iron, unwavering in his determination and precision. His movements were poetry in motion, each gesture calculated with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. His students looked at him with a mixture of admiration and awe, unaware that behind that facade of perfection, their master was waging a silent battle against an enemy that no karate technique could defeat, the spiritual void. Takashi's life was unfolding like a meticulously choreographed work of art until that fateful autumn day. The air was crisp and carried with it the scent of fallen leaves as he prepared for a special demonstration at his dojo. It was a day like any other, or so it seemed. The students lined up in perfect formation, their white gi resplendent in the light filtering through the dojo's high windows. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft rustle of bare feet on the tatami. Takashi moved with the grace that had made him famous, executing an advanced kata that he had perfected over decades. His movements were precise, each gesture charged with the experience of a lifetime dedicated to the martial arts. The spectators held their breath, captivated by the display of control and power. No one, not even Takashi himself, could have predicted what would happen next. In the middle of a particularly complex sequence, something changed. It wasn't a technical error. His movements were still perfect. It was something deeper, more fundamental. A sharp pain, like 1,000 needles piercing his chest simultaneously, shot through him. Time seemed to stand still as his body, which had for so long been his most trusted tool, betrayed him in the most spectacular way possible. The students watched in horror as their revered teacher, the epitome of strength and control, collapsed to the tatami like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The dull sound of his fall echoed through the dojo like distant thunder, followed by a moment of deathly silence before chaos broke out. What followed was an experience that defies all logic and conventional understanding. As his physical body was rushed to the hospital, Takashi's consciousness was plunged into a realm that no training had prepared him to face. He found himself floating in a void that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions, a space where the concepts of up and down, light and dark, lost all meaning. In this void, the shadows were not simply absences of light, but living entities whispering uncomfortable truths. Spectral voices murmured in the darkness, each word echoing with painful clarity. You have lived for appearance, you have forgotten essence. These words pierced his being like well-aimed arrows, exposing the chinks in the armor of perfection he had built up over a lifetime. It was in this state of utter vulnerability that the figures began to manifest. First it was his former teacher, a man who had passed away years before, but it was not the strong, confident teacher he remembered. This version carried the visible weight of regret on his countenance. His words resonated with a truth Takashi had never wanted to acknowledge. You are wrong too, like me. We became obsessed with form, forgetting spirit. One after another, the great masters Takashi had idolized all his life appeared before him. Each shared a similar story of regret and belated realization. They had reached the pinnacle of physical and technical perfection, but had failed to nurture what mattered most, the human spirit. And then, amidst this parade of repentant souls, there appeared the most incongruous figure of all, Buddha himself, seated in the lotus position, but chained to the floor of hell. The image was so bewildering that Takashi felt his mind struggling to process it. How could the enlightened one be trapped in a place of torment? Buddha's presence exuded a serenity that contrasted dramatically with the oppressive environment around them. His eyes, though compassionate, shone with an intensity that penetrated deep into Takashi's being. When he spoke, his voice resonated not as an external sound, but as a truth that arose from within Takashi's very consciousness. Do you think that external perfection can liberate the soul? Buddha asked, his words laden with the weight of eons of wisdom. Even enlightenment becomes a prison when it is chained to arrogance. Each word was like a bolt of lightning, illuminating the darkest corners of Takashi's soul, revealing truths he had been avoiding all his life. The revelation was devastating in its simplicity. His entire life, his pursuit of perfection had been an elaborate form of self-imposed prison. Every kata perfected, every technique mastered, every student instructed in the path of physical discipline had been another brick in the walls of his own spiritual prison. Tears began to flow, tears he had not allowed since his childhood, when his grandfather taught him that a true warrior never shows weakness. But here, in this place between worlds, earthly rules did not apply. Crying was not a sign of weakness, but the first step toward a long-overdue release. Time lost all meaning in that liminal space. It could have been minutes or hours as Takashi stood there, absorbing the truths that unfolded before him. Each revelation was like a wave eroding the rigid structures of belief he had built up over a lifetime. When he finally woke up in the hospital bed, his body was weak, but his spirit vibrated with a new, unfamiliar energy. Doctors spoke of a massive heart attack, of how lucky he had been to survive. But Takashi knew that what he had experienced went far beyond a simple medical crisis. During his physical recovery, something unexpected happened. A nurse, noticing his spiritual restlessness, left a Bible by his bed. At any other time in his life, Takashi would have ignored the book, considering it irrelevant to his spiritual path. But now, with his defenses down and his mind open to new possibilities, he began to read. The words about unconditional love, forgiveness, and redemption resonated with him in a way that no previous teaching had. It wasn't that these truths were new. They were present in every spiritual tradition he had studied. The difference was that now, for the first time in his life, he was truly ready to listen. The transformation that followed was as profound as it was gradual. Takashi began to rebuild his life and his teaching from scratch, but this time on a completely different foundation. His dojo was still a place of discipline and technical excellence, but now these qualities served a greater purpose. Classes began to change. Along with kata and combat techniques, Takashi introduced moments of spiritual reflection and discussion. He taught his students that true strength lies not in the ability to dominate others, but in the ability to master oneself, not through repression, but through love and understanding. The students noticed the change in their teacher. Where before there had been a cold and distant precision, there was now a warmth that invited openness and personal growth. The lessons became more than just physical training. They became opportunities for the integral development of the human being. Takashi began sharing his experience with others, not as a horror or cautionary tale, but as a testimony of transformation and hope. His encounter with Buddha in hell became a powerful metaphor for how our own beliefs and pursuit of perfection can become spiritual prisons. The irony was not lost on him. He had needed to descend into the depths of hell to find the path to true spiritual elevation. Buddha's message, seemingly paradoxical in its hellish context, had been the key that opened the door to his self-imposed prison. Over the years, Takashi's dojo transformed into a center for healing and spiritual growth. Students came seeking to learn martial arts and left with much more, a deeper understanding of themselves and their place in the universe. Takashi's story began to circulate in spiritual and martial circles, sparking debate and discussion about the nature of true enlightenment and the role of discipline in spiritual development. Some dismissed it as a fantasy or trauma-induced hallucination, but those who knew Takashi, who could see the profound change in him, knew that something extraordinary had occurred. The central message of his experience was clear. True freedom is not found in external perfection, but in the surrender of ego and the opening of the heart. The chains he had seen binding Buddha in hell were a reflection of the chains we all impose on ourselves in our quest for control and perfection. Today, Takashi continues to teach, but his message has evolved beyond martial arts. He speaks of the importance of finding a balance between discipline and compassion, between form and spirit. His teachings resonate with the universal truth that the true path to enlightenment is not through absolute control, but through acceptance and love. His experience reminds us that sometimes we must lose everything to find what truly matters. The hell Takashi experienced was not a physical place of eternal torment, but the result of a life lived in the prison of expectations and perfectionism. Takashi Nakamura's legacy continues to inspire new generations of spiritual seekers. His story reminds us that the true spiritual journey is not a straight line to perfection, but a winding path of discovery and transformation. And sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected places, even from an encounter with Buddha in hell. Takashi's transformation teaches us that true enlightenment is not a state of perfection to be achieved, but rather a continuous process of opening and growth. His story is a testament to the transformative power of love and understanding, and a reminder that it is never too late to start over. Ultimately, Takashi's experience challenges us to examine our own self-imposed prisons and invites us to consider what it really means to be enlightened. Is it external perfection that we seek, or is there something deeper and more meaningful waiting for us beyond our self-imposed limitations? The answer, as Takashi discovered on his extraordinary journey, may surprise us, and perhaps, like him, we need our own moment of crisis to awaken to a deeper truth, that the true purpose of our existence is not to achieve perfection, but to experience and share the unconditional love that lies at the heart of all authentic spiritual experience. This fundamental truth that Takashi discovered became the core of a quiet revolution in his community. The students who came to his dojo were no longer just looking to learn combat techniques. They came in search of something deeper, something that could fill the void that modern life had created in their souls. And Takashi, with his new understanding of spirituality and purpose, was uniquely suited to guide them. Mornings at the dojo began differently now. Before any physical training, Takashi led his students in a meditation practice that combined elements from various spiritual traditions. The silence of dawn was filled with the conscious breathing of dozens of students, each embarking on their own inner journey as the rising sun painted golden shadows through the dojo windows. The transformation of his teachings extended beyond the walls of the dojo. Takashi began organizing spiritual retreats where he shared his experience with people from all walks of life. Stressed executives, artists looking for inspiration, young people lost in the maze of modern life, all found something valuable in his words and in his presence. In these retreats, Takashi spoke openly about his encounter with Buddha in hell, but he did so in a way that transformed this seemingly terrifying experience into a source of hope and renewal. He explained how each of us creates our own personal hell through our attachments, expectations, and the relentless pursuit of illusory perfection. The impact of his teachings manifested itself in surprising ways. A successful businessman, after participating in one of his retreats, decided to completely restructure his company to prioritize the well-being of his employees over profits. An artist who had lost her inspiration found new creative purpose in exploring spiritual themes. A teenager who had been struggling with depression discovered a new reason to live. The stories of transformation kept coming, and with each one, Takashi felt he was gaining a deeper understanding of the purpose of his own experience. It had not been just for his personal benefit. He had been groomed to become a bridge between different ways of understanding spirituality and the purpose of life. As he grew older, Takashi began to document his teachings more systematically. He wrote several books that combined his martial arts knowledge with his spiritual perspectives. These books were not traditional technical manuals, but rather in-depth explorations of how physical training could become a path to spiritual enlightenment. In one of his most influential books, The Compassionate Warrior, Takashi wrote, The true warrior is not one who never falls, but one who has learned to rise with grace and humility. True strength lies not in the ability to defeat others, but in the ability to defeat ourselves without destroying ourselves in the process. His message resonated especially with those who, like him in his youth, had found themselves trapped in the pursuit of external perfection. He showed them how this quest, though noble in intent, could become a spiritual prison if it was not balanced with self-understanding and self-love. Over the years, Takashi's dojo became a center of spiritual pilgrimage. People traveled from around the world to experience his unique approach to martial practice and spiritual development. Some arrived skeptical, doubting the story of his encounter with Buddha in hell, but few left without being deeply touched by the authenticity and depth of his teachings. Takashi's influence extended beyond martial arts and traditional spirituality. Psychologists and therapists began to incorporate elements of his teachings into their practices. Educators found in his methodology valuable tools to help young people develop not only discipline, but also compassion and self-understanding. In his later years, Takashi developed a special program to work with people suffering from trauma and post-traumatic stress. His own experience of death and rebirth had given him a unique understanding of how trauma could become a doorway to spiritual transformation. This program combined gentle physical practices with guided meditation and narrative therapy. Participants learned to recognize their own internal prisons and gradually work toward liberating them. The success of the program was so remarkable that several hospitals and rehabilitation centers began implementing adapted versions of it. As he approached the twilight of his life, Takashi often reflected on the extraordinary path he had taken. He saw how every challenge, every moment of doubt and despair, had been necessary to lead him to a deeper understanding of life and its purpose. His legacy continued to grow even when he could no longer actively teach. His oldest students, now masters in their own right, carried his teachings on to new generations, each adding their own understanding and experience to the rich tapestry Takashi had begun to weave. In his later public lectures, Takashi spoke increasingly about the importance of community and human connection on the spiritual path. "We are not meant to walk alone," he said. "Even in our darkest moments, when we seem to be in hell itself, we are not alone. Enlightenment is not a solitary destination, but an awakening to our fundamental interconnectedness." This understanding of interconnectedness manifested itself in the way the dojo functioned as a community. It was not just a place of training, but a space where people could find support, understanding, and a sense of belonging. More experienced students mentored beginners, not only in physical techniques, but in their personal and spiritual development. The impact of Takashi's teachings continued to spread into ever-widening circles. Business organizations began inviting him to give talks on conscious leadership and organizational development. His ideas about balancing discipline and compassion resonated, especially in a business world that was beginning to recognize the importance of holistic employee well-being. In academia, his work began to be studied in departments of psychology, religious studies, and philosophy. Researchers found in his unique synthesis of Eastern and Western traditions a valuable model for understanding the integration of different systems of spiritual thought and practice. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Takashi's legacy was his impact on the individual lives of people who found in his teachings a path to their own liberation. Each story of personal transformation, each moment of awakening that his teachings inspired, was a testament to the universal truth he had discovered on his extraordinary journey, that the true purpose of life is not to achieve perfection, but to awaken to the love that lies at the heart of all existence. As her message spread, new interpretations and applications of her teachings emerged. Artists created works inspired by her story, therapists developed new methods based on her principles, and spiritual leaders from diverse traditions found in her experience a bridge for interfaith dialogue. His story of meeting Buddha in hell became a powerful metaphor for personal and spiritual transformation. It didn't matter whether people took it literally or as an allegory. The power of the narrative lay in its ability to illuminate profound truths about the nature of human existence and the path to spiritual liberation. In the years that followed, the impact of Takashi's teachings continued to reverberate throughout the world. His message that true enlightenment comes not from external perfection but from love and understanding continued to touch lives and transform hearts. a living testimony that sometimes we need to descend into our own personal hell to find the path to true spiritual freedom. This spiritual freedom that Takashi had discovered began to manifest itself in increasingly surprising ways in the lives of those who followed his teachings. Entire communities dedicated to practicing and expanding his unique methodology of personal and spiritual development sprang up. From small study groups in homes to retreat centers in remote locations, his message of transformation to acceptance and love continued to spread like ripples on a calm pond. Testimonies of personal transformation were multiplying by the day. A successful surgeon who had been on the verge of burnout found a new balance between his professional dedication and his spiritual development. A single mother struggling with anxiety discovered an inner source of peace and strength. A war veteran tormented by past traumas found a path to healing and reconciliation with himself. Educational institutions began to incorporate elements of Takashi's teachings into their student development programs. Prestigious universities created special courses that explored the intersection between traditional martial arts and modern spiritual development. Psychology departments began to scientifically study the effects of his integrated method of healing and personal transformation. In the mental health field, therapists and counselors developed new protocols based on their understanding of transformation through trauma. Their idea that our darkest moments can become portals to greater understanding resonated deeply with those working in the field of recovery and rehabilitation. Multinational corporations began implementing wellness programs based on its principles. Meditation rooms appeared in office buildings, and executives began to speak openly about the importance of spiritual development in the workplace. The concept of business success began to expand beyond numbers to include the holistic well-being of all employees. Artists and creatives found in his teachings an inexhaustible source of inspiration. Films, plays, and art exhibitions emerged that explored the themes of personal transformation and spiritual awakening that Takashi had lived and taught. His story of meeting Buddha in hell became a powerful cultural metaphor for transformation and rebirth. In the field of sport and athletic performance, his ideas on the integration of mind, body, and spirit revolutionized the way athletes approach their training. Coaches began incorporating mindfulness practices and spiritual development into their fitness programs, recognizing that true optimal performance emerges from a state of total integration of being. Traditional religious communities, which had initially been skeptical of his syncretic approach, began to find value in his message of unity and diversity. His experience became a bridge between different spiritual traditions, demonstrating that deeper truths transcend doctrinal and denominational boundaries. Researchers in the field of neuroscience began studying the effects of his practices on the brain, documenting significant changes in areas associated with empathy, self-regulation, and emotional well-being. Their findings provided a scientific basis for what Takashi had intuitively taught for years. In the realm of technology, developers created apps and digital platforms to make his teachings more accessible to a global audience. Virtual communities flourished, connecting people from different continents who shared a desire to explore and apply his principles of personal transformation. Social workers and community activists found in her teachings practical tools for social justice work and community healing. Her message that personal transformation is inseparable from social transformation resonated deeply with those working for positive social change. As his influence expanded, new interpretations and applications of his teachings emerged in fields as diverse as architecture, urban design, and environmental planning. The principles of harmony and balance he had taught began to influence the way people thought about creating spaces and communities. Younger generations in particular found in his teachings an answer to the crisis of meaning and purpose that many were experiencing in the digital age. His message of authenticity and genuine connection provided an antidote to the isolation and superficiality of modern life. Prison rehabilitation programs began to incorporate elements of his teachings, reporting remarkable results in terms of reduced violence and increased successful rehabilitation. His message that even in the darkest places there is the possibility of transformation and redemption found particularly fertile ground in these settings. In the medical field, health professionals began to recognize the importance of the spiritual dimension in the healing process. Hospitals began to integrate mindfulness and spiritual development practices into their treatment protocols, recognizing that true healing must address all dimensions of the human being. child development and early education specialists began adapting their principles to work with children, creating programs that fostered not only physical and cognitive development, but also emotional and spiritual growth from an early age. The impact of Takashi's teachings continued to expand in ways that even he could not have imagined. His simple yet profound message that true transformation comes from love and understanding, not external perfection, continued to find new expressions and applications in an ever-changing world. As time went on, it became clear that his legacy was not simply a set of techniques or practices, but an ongoing invitation to awaken to a deeper and more meaningful way of existing in the world. His personal story of descent into hell and encounter with Buddha had become a universal archetype of spiritual transformation and rebirth. And so, Takashi Nakamura's story continues to inspire and transform lives, reminding us that the true purpose of our existence is not to achieve an impossible perfection, but to awaken the love and wisdom that have always been present within us, waiting to be discovered even in the darkest moments of our lives.